Hey everyone, welcome back to Rational Conversations. Today we are going to be talking about something very interesting, something which was shown in the movie Trance. If you haven't seen it, this is your time. You have to watch it after you watch this interview. And this is going to be all about faith healing, and we're going to get deep into it and rip it apart from the inside. And for that, I'd like to welcome Thomas Westbrook, who's got the channel Holy Kool-Aid. So welcome on, Thomas. It's great to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you too. I think the last time that we saw each other was at the FFRF conference and PsyCon like a month before that. So
Yeah, exactly.
It's
So
been a while, almost little less than a year.
exactly. And actually, a little bit less than a year. I don't know why I'm looking at my watch for that. It's just this instinctive thing. But it was really great meeting
At
you.
exactly 11:59 a.m.
So it was really great meeting you. And I honestly, I bumped into your channel a few times here and there, and I'd soaked it in, but you have this tremendous wealth of information when it comes to especially Christianity. And there's every video is educational, and I don't even know how you get all the animations done. I know we talked about this, nothing went in. I have ADHD. That's the
I feel you there. Yeah, it's what happens when you literally are raised in a religion from such a young age and your parents are fundamentalists. I had missionary parents, and for them it was the most important thing. So every single morning I was brought up with basically a Bible in my hand and having devotions in the morning where we'd get together as a family and read the Bible and pray and sing worship hymns and stuff, and memorized huge chunks of it by the time I was 10. So
Wow.
you don't go through that kind of childhood and upbringing without getting a significant amount of exposure to a religion, and not just the holy book itself, but a lot of the kind of surrounding like church history and the context that the book was written. And so once I became an atheist, I started getting exposed to a lot more ideas surrounding things like neuroscience and the psychology of belief and the ancient history of the Near East, or the ancient Near East. So you start learning about these cultures and these time periods and like the different artifacts that we've found and archaeological remains. And so you start getting a big picture, and that has allowed me to kind of piece this stuff together and see like how much does my childhood and the things that I was taught growing up hold up to scrutiny.
Man, that is intense. I thought you said you were born in Azerbaijan, I think, right?
I was born in LA,
Oh, okay.
but I grew up overseas, and then I got to do a lot of travel too after my childhood. So I went to do a study abroad in Russia. I did a study abroad in Kazakhstan. And while I was there, I was actually working with a missions organization because I was still very much a Christian. That was kind of my last ditch effort to see if I could make something of my faith and go all out and see if God actually worked some way, in some noticeable way in my life and the lives of others. And by the time I was done with that, I was already kind of on the cusp of leaving my faith. And within about a year or two of that, I was an atheist. I'd been watching so many different TED Talks and science documentaries and listening to podcasts, and I stumbled into atheist YouTube, and there were just too many questions that were unanswered or that had really bad answers from the Christian perspective. I couldn't look the other way any longer.
So how did the process start? Like, when was that moment when you just started saying, wait a second, were you trying to challenge your own beliefs, or did you just stumble upon YouTube videos or something of that sort?
I wouldn't say that I started off trying to challenge my own beliefs. I kind of saw that as a bad thing. I thought faith was the ideal. It was you take this stuff without questioning, and that was the sign of a good Christian, was just like, even when there are hard questions, you still believe in spite of contrary evidence because like God has a plan. And now I think that is incredibly, in a way, immoral, at the very least intellectually dishonest. I think that we should go wherever the truth leads because truth is important. And if something is true, it withstands scrutiny. But there were a couple of points when I was younger where I had people push me in the direction who were other Christians that allowed me to start questioning. So I had a youth pastor that basically at one point said, hey, if you're exposed to a lot of evidence around evolution and you realize, hey, the earth actually isn't 6,000 years old and people did actually evolve, and that was the process that God used, because he was an old earth creationist. You don't have to throw out your faith. You can look at this and say, well, Genesis is allegorical and these stories are more metaphors than anything else, and there's value in them, but like the scientific evidence still stands. And so for him, science and faith weren't contrary. Then as I got older, that was when I was in high school, then in college, I was working as a church camp counselor. And one of my fellow counselors, he was kind of giving his testimony and talking about how he was trying to prove his faith. And he believed that truth would stand scrutiny. And so that's something that I say a lot on my channel and in interviews, because I genuinely believe that is the starting point. Is if you ask a Christian straight up, do you think that the truth can be scrutinized and it'll still be true? Almost every single one of them without question will say yes. And they assume that the evidence is going to lead them in the direction of the Bible. And that's cool. And if it does, great. But you should be open to changing your mind. I think everyone should be intellectually honest enough to be willing to change their mind and to not be afraid of going where the truth and the evidence point and lead. And so that was a point where I kind of started to take that in. And then as I was like reading the Bible more and learning more about science, it was just this slow thing where suddenly I realized that I didn't think that everything in the Bible was literally 100% true. And that was a huge moment where I was like, I can't believe I just said that out loud. And then I started learning more about psychology. I started learning more about things like sleep paralysis and what it is. And it was something that I had experienced and thought was demons at the time, because like for those who aren't aware of what sleep paralysis is, it's when you are going into, like, you're falling asleep or just waking up from sleep, and you're in that stage where you're kind of half asleep, half awake, and your brain sends signals to your body to paralyze your muscles so that you don't flail around and fall out of bed and stuff. And sometimes that system can not work and you get people who will sleepwalk and stuff. But there's also times where you wake up and it doesn't kick off, like it doesn't stop. And so you're still paralyzed and you're still stuck to your bed, but your sense of like proprioception, which is your body's self-awareness of like where all of your limbs and stuff are, where your body is in relation to itself and to the space around it, is kind of out of whack. And your prefrontal cortex, which is the region of your brain that's responsible for like cognitive reasoning and like actually logically piecing things together, is still kind of half asleep. And so your body is sitting there like feeling like it's kind of floating. And sometimes you feel like there's like a weight on you, there's a weight on your chest, and you start having these hallucinations because you're kind of mid-dream, like kind of half awake, half asleep. And so you'll have these hypnopompic or hypnagogic hallucinations, depending on if it's as you're falling asleep or as you're waking up. And a lot of times they can be really dark and terrifying and anxiety inducing. And so you might think that there is like a demon in the room, or in some cultures, depending on what the various folklore is, for some people, they've had hallucinations about an old hag or about a succubus or an incubus or something, or ghosts, demons. After the Roswell incidents, there were a lot of stories that sounded exactly like sleep paralysis, but were about aliens. And so as I started to learn about this, when I had previously, as a Christian, who was like, I thought I was saved by God and like untouchable by the devil because I was under God's protection, and yet I had a sleep paralysis experience where I'm like, I feel like the devil is in the room and there's like a demon somehow pinning me down, and I'm like crying out in my mind, like just sincerely, like going, Jesus, and focusing my eyes on this cross, and it's not doing anything. And I'm like, that should have worked. Like, why am I still frozen in this paralyzed state, completely helpless? And it was only after I understood that this is a well-known phenomenon that neuroscience has an explanation for, and you can do like brain scans and actually see chemically what's going on, that I started to lose a lot of my beliefs in demons and hell and Satan. And it was one thing led to another. that also didn't square with the idea of an all-loving God. Why would an all-loving God create hell? Why would a just God create an eternal punishment for finite crimes? There was a lot of factors that kind of played into it, but once the fear of hell was removed and I started to learn the history of how it had been man-made, then all of a sudden you lost the stick that was like the fear keeping you in the faith.
Yeah.
And without the evidence there compelling me to stay, it was only a matter of time before I basically was like, I can take the good bits, but I don't have to swallow all of it whole.
Man, that's got to be quite a journey. And it must be like, it really like bends your brain and challenges you because as you're uncovering the kind of beliefs that you hold and seeing that and genuinely accepting that a lot of it doesn't hold water, that I'm very fortunate. I never had to experience that. I've experienced it in different ways, which are less consequential to my person or my state of being or my state of mind. But that is traumatic. But I heard about a hypnagogic and hypnopompic sleep paralysis from Carl Sagan's Demon Haunted World. Quite a significant
Such a
book.
good book.
Oh,
Such
that
a
amazing book.
Yeah.
And I read it relatively later on in my journey as a skeptic, but it's just so enlightening. Even then, when you think of everything, his
Mhm.
perspective puts things in perspective. That's
Yeah.
Carl Sagan's got a lot of stuff going.
A lot of times when people ask me to recommend a book when they're just starting off on their journey in skepticism, that's kind of the go-to book that I'll point them to because it covers so many different things like that, that someone might believe in psychic phenomena, they might believe in UFO sightings, they might believe in Bigfoot or conspiracy theories or whatever the case is. And that book does a really good job of just kind of covering all of it. But it's also it's it was written in the 1990s. Carl Sagan passed away, I think, in like early 90s. And there's new things that have come up since then. I don't think that the flat earth movement was really much of a thing back then. There's other stuff. And so with my channel, basically, as I was learning these things and exploring them, I wanted to share my journey of how I was figuring out whether or not something was true or not, where the evidence pointed for other things. Because just because I don't consider myself a Christian anymore, that doesn't necessarily mean that I am skeptical of anything else. I could still believe in palm reading and astrology and tarot cards. I could still believe in that Ouija boards somehow connect us to ghosts in the afterlife. I could believe in UFO sightings and all sorts of paranormal things from like water dowsing to psychic surgery. And the world of alternative medicine is huge too, even in
True.
certain atheist circles, not skeptic circles as much, but there's a lot of scams and a lot of fraud that takes place by people who are selling some sort of supplement or some sort of product that really hasn't been tested at all. And so in my journey, my goal is not just to destroy one religion or just take out my anger from having been lied to for years as a Christian. It's no, I really want to go where the truth leads and explore topics that I may never have even had any exposure to until a few months ago, but it sounds fascinating and I want to know, what do we know about this?
Exactly. We're on exactly the same track there. I started off more with alternative medicine as when I first started writing and stuff like that. But I figured that there's a whole planet full of stuff. And I thought I'd keep away from religion for a while. But after I came to the FFRF meeting, I was like, you know what? I think we need to tackle religion as well. And not in a way that is offensive or derogatory in any way but in a genuinely intellectual way and kind of see what the problems are in general of some super bad ideas.
Religion has a way of making people defensive more so than a lot of beliefs. Now, that's not to say that there aren't people who get very defensive about things like some form of alternative medicine, especially if it's a group that they identify with. If they're in some kind of an MLM selling essential oils or something, and they believe that this can cure cancer or something, then they can make that part of their identity and get very defensive. But in that way, it kind of almost mirrors religions. But I think anyone in any faith shouldn't be threatened by honest inquiry. And if someone is saying, hey, look, this argument that you're putting forth for your faith is a bad argument, fundamentally at its core, because it commits these logical fallacies, because these particular things that you are using to reason from as the foundation of your belief are completely unsound. And if you really want to go where the truth leads, as someone who's religious, even if you think that, okay, that's not my only argument, which usually it's not, then you shouldn't be afraid of that. That should actually be a good thing. Someone saying, hey, look, I think that you can develop better arguments. I believe that you have that ability. I have enough hope that you can do that. I'm going to show you where this particular argument that you have is committing this logical fallacy. So at its core, it is a bad argument. And I think back when I was a Christian, I would have seen that and gone, okay, yeah, I don't want to have bad arguments. I don't want to reason illogically. I don't want to come up with something to try to convince someone based off of an argument that is not evidence-based, or that is literally committing some sort of logical error. And so while people do get defensive, I think if you're respectfully able to just point that out and be like, hey, look, here's where I think that this argument goes awry. Can we come up with a better argument together, maybe? Or can you maybe go back to the drawing board and think through this position? Because I think that if you genuinely have this life-altering belief, then it deserves to have better arguments than what you just put forth.
Absolutely. And we have these conversations in such a variety of ways. Like, especially Anthony Magnabosco, I did have him on. If you guys haven't watched my Anthony Magnabosco video, link is in the description. But so I really connected with the way that he puts forward, brings that conversation around, and how he helps people understand how they came to believe what they believe. And that is,
Yeah.
it's in a way, it's guiding them down a path to questioning their own beliefs to see if they hold water. He's not intentionally trying to dismantle their beliefs actively. It's just a questioning process. And that, I think, is very powerful. And if you can, it's a hard skill to get down. Have you tried?
Well, and I have. I've done it with Anthony in San Antonio, I think once
Nice.
before, but it's been a while. But I do love that approach. And I think at the same time, as we are asking other people to have that openness, to have their mind changed, we ourselves should be open to re-examining our own positions to make sure that they hold water, to make sure that we're not mistaken and that we're not misled, because there are positions that, like, I've changed my mind on in the last few years. And I think that if we approach them from a position of, hey, I'm very much open and willing to have my mind changed, if they themselves are not, at the very least, they might, or other people who are around or watching or something, might be able to see the difference between your two levels of intellectual honesty, where if one of you is, hey, I want to go wherever the evidence leads, do you have a good argument for me? Like, I'm willing to listen, I'm willing to hear it, and I'm willing to take it to heart. Are you willing to do the same?
Yeah.
And if they're not, if they just say, no, I believe this no matter what, I'm not changing my mind, I'm not budging an inch on it, this is who I am, this is what I believe, this is the right thing to do, and you have an approach that's open, then that contrast is often stark enough that people watching are like, yeah, one of these people is not being intellectually honest here.
And that's very important to kind of keep in perspective, because even now, like, things like logical fallacies and biases and stuff like that, like, I understand them, but I don't always have the ability to apply it in the situation. And of course, I never tell a person that you are making this logical fallacy, because that is a sure way to piss someone off. Like,
Yeah.
I see that happening on social media so much, and I'm like wishing people that didn't do it.
But I think that there are healthy ways to point that out without necessarily just being like, you are illogical. you're committing this logical fallacy. You're right. It does have a way of being almost like just tossing cold water in someone's face and saying in no uncertain terms, you are an illogical person because you did this, you said this illogical thing and reasoned illogically. And they're going to get defensive. And a lot of times they're not even going to hear what you say. They're not going to stop and piece it together. They're not going to go and Google the specific logical fallacy and figure out what it is and apply it to their own argument. But I think that you can do the same thing where you walk them through that thought process
Yeah.
in a more roundabout, diplomatic way. So, for example, there is a logical fallacy called an equivocation fallacy, where you're reasoning for one thing, but you might swap out the terms, like you might use a word in two different parts of your argument. And if you were to like lay the argument out in a logical form, like a syllogism, and a syllogism is basically just like the very basic, if you strip away all the pieces and the meat of the logical expression, you might have something like all SRP or something. And then that might be premise one. And then you're like, no PRQ or something. And then you might have the final one be like, so all SRQ or no SRQ or some SRQ or something. And so it's just basically like having really simple ways of putting it. And like obviously S and P and Q are the specific things that you are trying to reason for in the argument. So an example of that might be you would take something like the cosmological argument that's like everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And so you might look at that specific argument and I could be like, well, you're committing an equivocation fallacy. And they're going to be like, it's not a fallacy, it's logical because everything has a cause and stuff. And they're not necessarily going to understand what that means or what you're trying to say there. But if you point out that you're like, wait, when you say that everything has a cause, can you show me something else that has emerged from nothing? Like you're saying that the universe had a cause, like it popped into existence out of nothing. So it was caused ex nihilo, from out of nothingness, the universe emerged. And you're comparing that to things that simply have changes of state. So maybe this cup drops because it has the forces of gravity acting on it. Maybe it has the intentionality of me letting go. And so it falls and it changes in position. So that might be a change in state where it falls from here to here. And so you can say, what is the cause of that? And you can point to different things. And but it's not coming into existence from nothing. So those are two different types of cause. Like one is causation from nothing. The other is everything that we see around us already exists. And as it changes in state, it's due to Newton's laws of motion or the laws of physics and stuff. And so you can point to those causal aspects. And so you're looking at two different meanings of the word cause. And you can't just use those as if they are the same within a logical structure. So if you point that out to someone when you're having a debate with them, rather than just being like, you're committing an equivocation fallacy, if you simply say, okay, so you're saying that the universe was caused from nothing, are there other things that we know of that came into existence from nothing? Because you're comparing it to other things, but it feels like we're using two different terms there. And that doesn't quite work for me. I think that there's like kind of more diplomatic ways of doing that.
That is an alpha level skill though, which I haven't developed yet, but it's just I think it's just about experience and kind of getting into things more consistently. But the reason why we're talking is because you apparently have been doing a lot of research on faith healers. So what got you started on that?
Well, I was raised in an environment that wholeheartedly believed that. I wholeheartedly believed that. And I've been to faith healing meetings. I've had people pray over me. I've had quote unquote miracles that I experienced, that I thought that I experienced.
Like what?
So I've had situations, for example, one, I just did a video recently where I was telling Drew this story from a genetically modified skeptic, another YouTuber, where I went to this like church retreat and everyone there believed in faith healing and stuff. And while I was there, I had this accident and I broke my toe. And I asked someone to pray over my toe. and it's like literally like sticking out, protruding out of my foot. And
Uh,
he comes up and like he had basically had all these claims that he was a prophet and he could like heal people of all different things. And it was stuff like people would have an upset stomach and then he'd pray over them and suddenly it wouldn't have an upset stomach anymore. And there were a lot of things that could be attributed to a placebo effect
yeah, exactly.
or things that can be attributed to the intensity of the moment, the adrenaline, the stress of the cortisol, and then you've got like him laying on hands. And so you have like when you have physical contact with someone, your body releases oxytocin, which
Yeah.
is called like the love hormone, but it's more than that. And it has kind of a calming, soothing effect. And so you've got like this whole just chemical explosion in your brain going on in this incredibly high adrenaline situation where you're in like a faith healing rally and you're like anticipating it. So you've got all this dopamine, which is like the reward chemical of the brain that's like going off, just I want my miracle. And there's all this pressure and all this stuff. And then you have everyone watching, and there's this expectation of healing, and he's suddenly laying on his hands, and you're just getting this hit of adrenaline. And so you're gonna have a natural pain numbing effect when someone like lays hands on you in the power of God, and you're just like, oh my God. And the adrenaline is going to counteract. It's a natural analgesic, a natural painkiller. It's going to counteract a lot of the pain from something that you're experiencing. And so I had in the past experienced things that I thought was faith healing, where like my shoulder had some pain in it and someone like said a prayer over it and it felt like it had gone away. And then I was like, no, it hadn't. And in this situation where my toe was basically broken, then and protruding out, up and out of my foot,
Okay.
then I'm sitting there going, can you pray over it and make it better? And I wholeheartedly believed it. And I was like super right with God. I was like in a place where I was like praising God and wanting a miracle and all this stuff. And he just looks at it and he's like, I feel God wants to use this as a lesson for you. Because
Oh,
he knew in that moment that he was full of crap and he didn't have the ability to just spray and have the toe just crunch back into place like it's being set by a doctor. But that was the kind of miracle that I thought happened, I thought existed. And faith healers will all the time claim that they are able to heal someone's cancer. It's something that they might be able to get rid of the pain in the moment. And then the person goes back and stops taking their chemo and radiation treatments, stops going to see the doctor. And within a few months or a year, they're dead. And a lot of this stuff is the numbers of it are absolutely gigantic, but no one talks about it because they don't want their testimony to harm the faith of others. So they sweep it under the rug. They still believe in God and they just think that maybe it was God's time for them, or maybe they didn't have enough faith, or maybe there was some sin in their life. And so there's a lot of shame surrounding why were they not healed? Why did God not choose them? Was he just calling them home? And so these charlatans will go from city to city, sometimes having massive meetings, massive rallies, packing out stadiums, bringing in millions of dollars, flying around in private jets and staying in hotels that cost $15,000 a night. And they're raking in money from the Bible Belt, which is often the most poor region of the US. And then they're going to other countries. Sometimes they'll have huge rallies in India. Sometimes they'll have rallies throughout various countries in Africa. And they'll rake in a fortune and then they get away with it because it's just practicing their religious faith. And they have religious exemptions for essentially what's practicing medicine without a license and with no medical training whatsoever. And they're sending people home to die after they have received thousands of dollars in tithes and donations from desperate people who think that if they give to these ministries that God is going to bless that seed of faith, that money that they're investing in the ministry, and that God is going to, as a result, cure them. And it doesn't happen. And so there's a huge amount of harm. Like the bodies, there is a trail of bodies a mountain high behind most of these big name faith healers. And it is legal genocide at its worst.
absolutely. And it's purely, it's reprehensible how, like, if there was an actual term like evil, I think it should apply to these guys because they are
Absolutely.
taking advantage of the weak, of the vulnerable, of the sick, and giving them false hope that is more likely than not just hasten their, or just aggravate their condition, or hasten
Mhm.
their demise, which is absolutely
in
disgusting.
in a moment when the people are the most desperate
Yeah.
and they're preying on some of the least educated parts of the world, the least educated regions of the country. They are preying on people who have tried other things sometimes, or maybe they can't afford to try other things, and yet they will go into debt to give their last penny to these faith healers.
Yeah.
And there's no refunds, there's no legal measures that people can really take, and when they have tried to take them to court, then these faith healers have massive legal teams and have an entire network of other pastors with political connections to make sure that it absolutely gets buried in the courts and they can like lobby for more quote unquote religious freedom. And I think if you're religious, I understand how, like most people understand why non-religious people or people of other faiths would look at this and be outraged by it because it's understandably maddening. But I would argue that if you're a Christian and other Christians engaging in this kind of fraud, that you should be even more furious about it. You should be so outraged by this because here you have people that are in the name of your faith, in the name of your religion, and in the name of your God, scamming people out of fortunes, absolute massive amounts of money so that they can live extravagant lifestyles
Yeah.
and doing it to the detriment of their health. And basically, people are dying, or people are having, in some cases, even if they don't die, they might have severe damage caused because maybe they have a condition, maybe they are barely able to walk, or they have a broken bone or something. And now this faith healer is coming in telling them, like, oh, remove your crutches and throw away your canes and your wheelchairs and just walk. You're going to be healed. And in the moment, they have a rush of adrenaline and they feel like they're fine and they hobble around. And then they go home and permanent damage can often result because they're supposed to isolate that limb while it heals. And now it has damage that results and it's not able to set properly, or it shifts or something. You can have a lot of harm. A great example of this is people who have had neck braces. Maybe
Mm.
they had like their neck was cracked or broken, but they're not completely paralyzed, but it's very fragile and it needs to set and it needs to heal. And these faith healers will be like, you're healed, and remove the neck brace and throw it away. You won't need it anymore. And then they'll shake them about and jostle them about as this demonstration of God's healing power. And it's like, you're literally taking someone who potentially just had a spinal. And if you've ever worked as a lifeguard, like when someone hits their neck in the bottom of a pool, if they're not completely paralyzed, they're lucky, but you got to be really careful. And we used to drill this because I worked as a lifeguard for a while, where like you go in and you like are holding the person's neck very carefully as you're like trying to like get them out of the water and keep their head above water while you're like floating. And then once you get them out of the water, it's involves like a backboard that's slid in and you put them against it. Now, it's been years since I've worked as a lifeguard, so I don't remember all the exact details, but what I can tell you is that you have to be super careful to keep the neck straight and not jostle it about,
Yeah.
because if in that situation it's moved unnecessarily, it can cause permanent damage to the spine that can result in paralysis if the person wasn't already paralyzed from the accident.
Yeah.
And now you have people who are maybe in a condition recently out of the emergency room going to these faith healers being told that they're cured and then just jostled about. And it's, I think, absolutely criminal that
It
they
is.
do this,
It
get away
is.
with it.
And so this movie I was telling you about is called Trance, and it came out a few years ago, and it shows the journey of a guy who basically gets not coerced, but pushed into this job of being a faith healer. And he becomes a superstar and he loves it. He loves the attention and he genuinely thinks he's helping people. But then he does, of course, have a crisis where he realizes, he starts questioning his own abilities, if he's actually healing people or not.
Mm.
And the truth is, okay, there might be some people like that, maybe at the very beginning of their journeys.
Yeah.
It's very hard to believe that most people would genuinely believe that they're going to be able to do this. Otherwise, they wouldn't be moving around as much, at least from my perspective.
I do not think that every single faith healing practitioner knowingly knows that they are defrauding people. However, I do think that I want to be careful because I don't want to be sued, but because in the States, you can't just outright call a specific person a fraud or a liar or a con artist. And if they're litigious, they can come after you. But that said, I think that at least almost all, with that very tiny legal caveat
Yeah,
of the top 100 or top 1,000 or like all the big name mega church faith healers know exactly what they're doing.
absolutely. Like
And
it
yeah,
was Peter Popoff, right? Who James Randi exposed and very clearly exposed. I think it on television. It was definitely in the
yeah.
newspapers.
It was on The Daily Show, which was like the biggest show
Yeah.
at the time. And on live TV, he showed that this faith healer who claimed to have divine revelation from God and the ability to miraculously heal people, he was a televangelist who had probably hundreds of thousands of followers. At the very least, he's blasting out his programs on TV, and
Absolutely.
people all over the US and all over the world are tuning in and watching it. So potentially millions. I don't know the exact numbers, but this guy is getting these pieces of information that is like, how in the world could he get this? And he's saying things like, is there someone here in the audience named Mary Williams who lives on 123 North Main Street or something? He's getting their address, he's getting their name, he's getting their condition, and then he's telling them that they're healed. And so the in addition to what I was saying earlier about all of the neurochemicals that are firing simply from being in the heat of the moment, now you're adding to the strength of the placebo effect by literally having people believe it even harder because how could he possibly know this? It must be divine. It must be a miracle. But he had an earpiece. And his wife, before the service, the congregants were going around collecting prayer cards from people and having them fill out, okay, name, address, information, why are they here? What do they want to be healed from? And it was all the stuff that he was getting from his wife, who's going in a back room and through the earpiece is reading off these prayer cards to him. And he's word for word quoting his wife. And what Randy was able to do is tap into the radio signal and record his wife saying it to him over the earpiece and then him repeating it. And here's the crazy thing that I found while I've been making these videos is that the use of prayer cards in the same way has not been like everyone knows the Peter Popoff story if they've kind of delved a little bit into faith healing, but he was far from the only one. There's a very famous faith healer named William Branham, who's kind of an idol among a lot of these modern church movements, like a lot of the huge faith healing televangelists, like Kenneth Copeland is a huge one who he's I think one of the wealthiest pastors, if not the wealthiest in America. He was part of Donald Trump's evangelical advisory committee. He ran like the Trinity, I think it's the Trinity Broadcasting Company and stuff. Like it has all these shows that he puts out. And
Was he the guy who was trying to blow Corona away with the breath of
yeah,
God? Is that the guy?
yeah,
My
yeah,
God.
it was that guy.
Whenever I see him, whenever I saw his interview with this lady, this journalist who was saying like, you have a private jet and you have all of these things and
Yeah.
how can you justify it? I can't say I swear to God, but I swear, like if you take just his face, put a pair of horns on him, that's like Satan. The kind of crazy look he has in his eyes. I don't know. Maybe I'm just projecting on this, but I swear that guy looks spooky. And
He looks evil. He looks straight up evil.
he looks really evil, and he behaves exactly as evil. Sorry for interrupting you. Carry on.
Yeah. But Kenneth Copeland, Benny Hinn is, I believe he is like Palestinian or Jewish in origin, but then migrated to Canada and in the US, lives in like the wealthiest neighborhood in California on like coastal property, like beachfront property in a multi-million-dollar mansion, flies private jets, takes vacations to Dubai and stays in like these $20,000 penthouses and stuff. It's ridiculous the amount of money that he has. And yet every single one of them talks about this dude, William Branham, as if he had this incredible, miraculous anointing of God. And they have to, because he was a faith healer who's going around and is incredibly well connected and plugged in to all of these other faith healers at the time who were a part of like magazines. Like one of the huge magazines at the time was called The Voices of Healing by Gordon Lindsay. And in this magazine, it was basically like, I think around 200 faith healers that are all contributing to the magazine, talking about when their next faith healing appointment is and stuff. And William Branham was the one that initially started that magazine. And he was the inspiration for a ton of other faith healers in the movement. People like Oral Roberts were very closely connected to him. But he also was the inspiration of Jim Jones, who went down to Jonestown and had the cult down there and the massive massacre that killed almost 1,000 people. He also was the inspiration for Colonia Dignidad, which is, if you're familiar, in Chile, it was an area where people were basically would disappear to in this compound, and they were tortured and killed. And I think there's like another cult as well that he's got ties to like all of this stuff. And he has a really dark history, connections with, I think he was ordained by one of the grand wizards of the KKK, because like racism was like huge in the, like, not that it still doesn't have roots in the church today, but like at the time, the Klan was like super well connected to the faith healing movement. And so this guy, William Branham, he used prayer cards just like Popoff did.
Oh.
W.V. Grant, another massive faith healer, used prayer cards just like Popoff did. Jack Coe was one of the biggest. He had the biggest tent, because they used to set up tents just outside of cities, and tens of thousands of people would show up to these faith healing rallies in these huge tents that would go from city to city and stay for weeks at a time, having meetings every single night. Jack Coe used prayer cards. Like it's such a common trick that's used, and like they just, without saying it, there's, oh no, Peter Popoff abused the system, but we actually use it. And like people will tell stories about times where like they put down one thing on the prayer card that wasn't accurate, and he read off that information and it didn't pan out. And like he's obviously getting it from the prayer card and not from God. And it's that type of stuff that is still going on to this day. And it's similar to psychics that will perform hot reads on people, where ahead of time they will get a list of all the attendees that have purchased tickets online to their upcoming psychic reading. Who do you want to connect with? Who's the loved one that you're here to talk to today? Oh, your grandpa just passed away. Okay. Well, they might have information that people fill out before they go into these readings, but they can also get a list of all the attendees. And so they can go through and see, hey, who can we find on Facebook that has their privacy settings disabled, so we can literally go through their timeline and learn all these bits and pieces about them that I couldn't possibly have known, and then go and tell it to them. And faith healers are able to do these same modern day surveillance tricks, in addition to the old school techniques like prayer cards and earpieces. And so you start seeing these connections between people where like they're using the same techniques, and they're all talking each other up as, oh, this person, a great person of God. And like, they're all using the same scams and the same cons, but they don't want to admit it even to each other. And so they just play the act as if it's all real. And a lot of times their staff coming into it think, okay, I'm joining the ministry of God, and very quickly realize that it's a money-making operation. And so you have exposés that are done when journalists will come in, and you'll have staff members they're literally scared to come out because either they're worried it'll negatively affect the faith and they still believe that in God, or they're still Christians, but they think that this particular person is just a bad actor, that they're just a bad apple, and that it's just them, or it's just them and a few other faith healers, but that's not real Christianity. And so they don't want to come forward, or they're genuinely afraid of the repercussions, because these faith healers have massive resources and are incredibly litigious, and oftentimes have like non-disclosure agreements that people have to sign. And if they come out or they come forward detailing the abuse and how these people are running these massive money-making operations, some of them will say things like, I never once saw anyone genuinely get healed, or I heard story after story of people who went home, stopped taking their medication, and died. and we don't talk about that. And there's instances where, like with Benny Hinn, he was basically exposed on, I think it was ABC, did this whole expose on him. I think Inside Edition did as well, where people, oh, no, it was, I think CBC Canada that did this specific one I'm talking about, where this girl who had this complex, like, curvature of her spine to the point where she was like in a wheelchair and could not move anything except a little bit of like her hands, and like definitely couldn't walk, is trying to get to the front to have Benny Hinn pray over her. And this other guy, Justin Peters, who is a Christian, by the way, but who exposes a lot of these faith healing charlatans, he also has a condition where like he is barely able to walk with like, canes. And both of them tried to make it to the front. And Benny Hinn has spotters. He basically has henchmen or bodyguards that are like, no, you can't go up to the front, because they don't want those people on stage. They want the people who maybe have a little bit of pain in their knee or have something that is impossible to detect in the moment, but they can say, oh, I was cured. Your diabetes is healed. How are you going to know that? How are you going to know that? Oh, it's cured. Are you going to do a blood sugar test on the spot? And if it's like too high or too low, is he going to be like, well, yeah, it's God has already healed it, but you need to go home and eat something or let your blood sugar come back down, and then the diabetes, you're not going to see any signs of it. God is starting to work in your life. And they don't want the people on stage who are noticeably ill or who have an amputation. They're not going to try to regrow a limb. So they make sure that they can't get on stage, and they like screen them and keep them off stage. Reinhard Bonko was another one who he used to do these massive rallies all throughout Africa and other parts of the world. But I think he predominantly focused in Africa. I think he was German, if I'm not mistaken, but passed away in the last decade or two. But he would have these huge rallies, and he also had screeners that would only let specific people on stage in order to add to the act.
Yeah, this is how similar this sounds to like alternative medicine, but it's a lot more insidious, I think. But as far as, because a lot of the alternative medicine practitioners, I'm drawing a very broad analogy, of course, is that they know the limits to which the confirmation bias will work. They know limits of which the placebo effect and regression to the mean will work. So they give you a little bit of something for a little bit of something, and you head home, and eventually things get better. And, or at least you think they're getting better. But when it comes to things like cancer, when it comes to things like, they can give you diabetes, but they wouldn't dare say, don't take your medicine along with this. So, I think it's a very similar mechanism in the minds of the people who believe in this. Because I think a lot of the responses I got when I've challenged alternative medicine is very similar to religious backlash when you criticize somebody's belief systems. And it is that deeply ingrained that people, it's the faith is the only thing, that belief system is the only thing that keeps them strapped into that belief. Whether it's alternative medicine, whether it's ketogenic diets, whether it's faith healer actually working.
I think, no, I am going to throw them a bone. And I'm going to say one thing, that I think that there's a position that many of them hold and put forward that is I believe, a very good argument. And that is that they'll say things like, but our medical system is so fundamentally broken. And I've tried all these other things, and I've tried doctors, and nothing has been working. And I just feel sicker. I'm not getting better and stuff. Or it's prohibitively expensive and I can't afford it. And I hear those arguments and I truly empathize.
Yeah.
Because modern medicine is not perfect. And I'm not going to pretend like it is. I'm not going to pretend like there is a cure for cancer. I think that if you catch it early enough, then sometimes it can be beaten. And that's the best shot that we have to beat cancer, is using something that has been medically tested and tried and stuff. Because other stuff that you throw at it is, this is something that and I think it was Tim mentioned that said, alternative medicine by definition is something that either has been proven not to work or hasn't yet been proven to work. And once it has been proven to work, it's no longer alternative medicine. It by definition is medicine.
Exactly.
And so like I'm not opposed to certain alternatives. Hell, I'm not opposed to prayer. If it makes them feel better and they're turning to prayer in addition to doing the medically responsible thing, then okay. Or even if the person is, you know what, I'm just so tired of feeling like crap from chemo. And if I die, I'm so done with it. I empathize with that position. I'm like, okay, like I get where they're coming from. And if they don't want to go the medical route anymore, like that's their choice. I genuinely believe that is their choice. I don't think that it's their choice when they're making that decision for their children or they're making that decision for their grandparents. I think that's child abuse or elder abuse.
Yeah.
But if someone is making an informed, conscious decision that they don't want to seek medical treatment for themselves, that's their decision. Where I think that my empathy entirely runs out is when it comes to the faith healers themselves that
Yeah.
are fooling and tricking people so that they are not making informed, conscious decisions, but they are making a choice based off of manipulation. They're making a choice based off of false information, and it's enriching and it's lining the pockets of con artists and charlatans. And whether it's alternative medicine practitioners selling some supplement that they promise is a cure all that hasn't been tested, or whether it is a charlatan. But I do think that while there are problems with our medical system and while it's not perfect, the solution is not to turn to known charlatans or known things that don't work. The solution is to fix our system. In the US, make healthcare available and affordable for everyone,
Absolutely.
invest more globally in healthcare to the point where like we do have cures for things that you just look at how medicine has advanced in the last 100 years or the last 200 years. And if we invest more in research and improving the cures and stuff, then I think that we can have better systems, and also having more doctors and more medical professionals and nurses and stuff who actually take time to sit with the person and listen to them, hear their frustrations and complaints and what they're struggling with, rather than just being like, hey, we got to get you in, get you out. We're understaffed and everything is so expensive. And so just like we have to see as many people as possible right now. And you've got 10 minutes to basically have me like write down a prescription and throw it at you. I think that system sucks. It doesn't work. People are frustrated and tired of it. And so I empathize there, but the solution is not snake oil.
Yeah. So I think it was Britt Marie Hermes. She used to be a naturopath, and I think she's spoken at either TAM or Psychon at some point of time or the other.
I've seen her talk at PsyCon before.
Ha. I wish I'd managed to see her talk, but I've seen her articles and I've seen a couple of her interviews. But the thing that doctors need to learn from alternative medicine practitioners is that they should be present and discuss the problem, make the patient feel cared for, make the patient feel like they are being considered and that they are being understood.
Yeah.
Because it's so many doctors these days. Maybe it's the pressure of earning a certain amount. Maybe it's the pressure of having just too many people coming to you and not enough resources to manage it all. Because I know I have a whole ton of medical problems. And there are times when I have to go to the hospital and I have to sit there for 4 to 5 hours waiting for a doctor to see me. And when I do see him, he's got two other families or two other patients lined up before me inside his office. He just wants to keep that line moving. And
Yeah.
I'm sure he wants to care more for his patients because he's a good doctor.
Yeah.
But he just doesn't have that bandwidth. There's just too much demand and too little supply. And especially in India, where we have far too few doctors attending. I mean, per 100,000 people, I think we have way below the WHO recommended number, which is, I think that's 10. I think we're still at that's the minimum number that the WHO recommends. We're still at about 7 per 100,000. I think it's some pretty. So it's really heartbreaking to see that. And I think that's another reason why a lot of Indians do tend to also believe in alternative medicine. But fortunately, we have a medical system which is it is a hybrid between private and government control. So the government controlled hospitals are horrible. But what the government does do well is that they make sure that the prices do not skyrocket, that they have limits on certain essential medicines for certain conditions to make
Mm,
sure that people are able to access that.
yeah.
Uh, we just have a shit ton of people that it's logistically impossible for everybody to be able to access it. But in the US, this is the one thing, like, everybody looks up to the US with such admiration in so many ways. And I feel so bad and it's so obvious that when it comes to medical research, when it comes to medical science, the US is definitely still one of the leading countries. They are doing amazing work that way. A lot of the studies that are coming out, a lot of the research that is being done, whether it's epidemiological, whether it's RCTs, a huge bulk of this is coming out of the US. And yet, you have a medical system which is just completely based on profit, and it is completely unregulated. And I think that is such a travesty.
Yeah.
It's such a disservice to the
And
population. It's
oftentimes, because it's set up that way, it is because the US is so terrified by the word socialism that any kind of social welfare program that is put forward can easily be shot down by medical companies that if they don't want to see that change because it affects their profits, they can simply fearmonger and be like, this is socialism. And it's
yeah,
okay. We don't think of our police system as socialism, and yet it's paid for by the public to take care of a particular aspect of society that we're spending trillions of dollars on military spending.
yeah,
It's like, well, that's something that I didn't choose where my tax dollars went, but my money is going to protect this nation and also to set up military bases all over the world, and to whether you think it's a good thing that keeps global peace or whether you think that it's a colonial horror of a vestige of colonialism, that's a topic for a whole nother time.
yeah,
But that money is going towards something that, like, you are paying for. You're paying for the roads, even if you are not driving, you or if even if I don't have kids that are in school, I'm still being taxed. And my taxes are going towards these common goods for society, these common infrastructure elements. And everyone needs healthcare. Everyone needs to go to the doctor. And yet we're terrified of having some kind of medicine or some kind of government, whether it's government subsidized or a public option or whatever the case may be. We're like, oh no, it has to be purely private commercial interest. And so whether you live or die comes down to how valuable are you in terms of net worth and how much money you make and how much of your paycheck you're willing to sink into the bottomless hole of medical insurance.
it's
But
hard.
yeah,
The weird thing is, we see this moving away from modern medicine in other situations as well. I was just thinking, first of all, Africa. In Africa, many countries have the same system as the US. When they're like, a lot of the pharmaceutical companies have absolutely no regulation. They can charge whatever they want. And it is up to the people to get insurance. So basically, their lives are in the hands of the insurance people. And they have a market that is saturated with alternative medicine. So I'm not even surprised that there's a lot of faith healing happening there as well, because a lot of the countries have been indoctrinated into Christianity. And I think the Vatican has also taken a lot of interest in a lot of these countries because they see a lot of opportunity there. So people are just, and I think there's a lot of superstition as well in many of these countries when it comes to not just medicine, but like LGBT people and HIV, et cetera, et cetera. It's absolutely horrific. But they're like prime pickings for this sort of stuff. And on the other hand, You have Europe, which may not be into that much faith healing, but they're into every other form of woo that you can imagine. Every other way of healing yourself with coconut oil and God knows what else. It's
I think it depends. It depends on the country,
yeah,
because some countries it's kind of like people will oftentimes, especially in the US, our knowledge of geography is absolutely atrocious. And I think part of that is because the US is so isolated from the rest of the world that, like, even just getting a one-way ticket to Europe or Asia or Africa, it costs stupid amounts of money, and so people will go to other states, whereas, like, in Europe, you can hop on a train and go to 10 different countries that are all, like, surrounding you within a weekend trip away for
yeah.
super cheap. And so you get more exposure to more cultures and more countries and more languages and things. So that said, whenever people lump in, they'll talk about Africa as just like this homogenous blob.
One big country.
Yeah, they think of it as a country, and so they'll just lump it in, and they'll do the same with Europe. And I want to avoid that because there are parts of Europe that, namely, like, if you go to former Soviet countries, under the Soviet Union, there was definitely, while there were scientific advancements specifically where the government wanted to invest, namely like the space race and physics, in other areas you had a tremendous amount of pseudoscience, and oftentimes government endorsed pseudoscience and a lack of education surrounding it. So you had ideas like Lysenkoism, which was this notion that instead of like Mendelian genetics playing a role in the success of, let's say that you plant some crops and you want them to grow. Well, you think about it and you're like, okay, we need to make sure that the right conditions are there. We can look at how these plants have these traits have passed down genetically from one to another and stuff. And we can find the right forms of crop rotation and irrigation, all these things. Well, with Senkoism, basically that this guy had connections to the state, and he put forth this theory that, I'm gonna misquote it probably, but it was basically that plants function in a more cooperative way and they all want to work together, and it's almost like communism at a plant level. And so if you just plant more plants next to each other, they'll share resources more effectively and stuff, and it resulted in massive famines and a lot of people died. But anyone that actually questioned his pseudobiology oftentimes was sent to the gulag or sent to basically exterminated or kicked out of academia and science. And so it was this unquestionable aspect of the Soviet experience or under the USSR for decades. And so if you go to certain areas of Eastern Europe that are former Soviet, or you go to Russia or something, there are things that you will encounter. There's a lot of beliefs in kind of psychic phenomena, the paranormal, the supernatural, but they might not have the same level of religious
Yeah, exactly.
pseudoscience because they come from a more secular background where under the Soviet Union there was a lot of suppression of religion. And so there's various flavors of pseudoscience where the education system has failed them. And if, on the other hand, you go to the UK, you're not going to get Lysenkoism, but you might have astrology or something because you've got that all over the papers.
Yeah.
You go to somewhere like Finland, and there's a much higher focus on education, and more people are seeking out higher levels, higher forms of education, like master's degrees and postdoc research and things like that. And so you see a little bit less of it. And I think it just really depends from country to country and which form of pseudoscience is big where varies. But none of us are immune to it. We have to constantly be vigilant and constantly apply our tools of scientific skepticism to make sure that we don't fall prey to stuff.
Absolutely. Have you, in your research, have you encountered other religions that have been practicing faith healing?
I have. There's, for starters, it's not uncommon within Islam. Faith healing is very much an aspect that if you believe in miracles in any religion and you believe that a god wants you to be healed or full or made well or something, it's ripe for taking advantage of. And there is a particular faith healer, Muslim faith healer, I forget the name of him, but he would go around and do these faith healing stunts. I want to say it's fairly common within Sufis. I forget specific sects within Islam that it's more prevalent than others. I haven't honestly delved that deeply into that. But in Hinduism, there are certain miracle claims that. Are you familiar with Satya Sai Baba?
Of course.
Yeah.
Everything he knows.
So he would perform, I'm sure you're familiar, but like for your audience who's not, he would basically say, "Oh, I just pulled this like speck of holy smoke out of the air or something." And he would make these prophetic predictions and stuff. And he was this guru that claimed he had these supernatural divine powers. He said he was like the reincarnation of some holy person or something. And I want to say that he also claimed to perform various like healing, like faith healing.
Absolutely.
stunts.
I think he was the one who would go around and have little bits of ash. He'd have ash pellets, which would be hidden in his palm, and he'd
Yeah, I
crush.
think I said smoke, but I meant
Yeah.
ash.
So he'd crumble those and put them into people's hands, and that was supposed to be some sort of holy ash. And I actually saw him in another video where he is supposed to have produced a golden egg from his mouth. And he goes into a kind of this kind of trancey kind of look, and then he takes a towel in his hand and he puts it to his mouth, and then out of his mouth he comes out with his egg. I mean, like the egg was in the towel all the time.
Yeah.
Very, very easy to demonstrate. And it's so amateur. And another trick that he used to do was, I think this was also caught on video, where he would produce a gold necklace out of seemingly nowhere.
Yeah.
But
It's like the whole "is this your coin behind your ear" type of trick.
exactly.
Like kids fall
So-
for it. But Abhijit, check this out though. I'm gonna produce something more impressive than a golden egg from my mouth. It's gonna be entirely unorganic. There's a remote control.
You had it in there all the time. Come.
Me and Satya Sai Baba are right up there.
Yeah, man. That was very convincing though. You've got a future ahead.
He also like wrongly predict the date of his death.
Yeah, I think he did. And he wrongly predicted it, and then it happened at a point where I don't think it was predicted at all. It's happened unexpectedly. I'm a little hazy on that exact thing, but he has been exposed multiple times. There was an entire film which was made with Sanal Edamaraku, who I interviewed recently.
Yeah, no.
He's
He's the same guy that found the Mary statue that looked like it was crying or something in India, and he exposed that it was actually a sewer leak from nearby water, and people were like collecting the tears and drinking.
I thought it was a Mary crying, but actually it was a statue of Jesus on the cross.
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
Dripping down from his feet, because you couldn't see clearly because the statue was quite tall. And only the feet were in the vicinity of where people could be able to clearly make it out. And it was dripping. And people were taking droplets of that. They were being distributed by the priests. People
It's so gross.
on their mouths. People were putting it in their hair. And
It was like a toilet pipe that was like leaking, wasn't it?
Exactly.
But when he exposed that, the result was not, "Oh man, we're so glad that you caught this." I believe he had to leave the country because he was getting death threats over it.
Absolutely. There were cops from Mumbai who said that, "I know where you're hiding. I will come there and personally break your arms and your legs. Or you can come here yourself and we'll arrest you, put you in a jail cell, and I'll put you in with somebody who will ensure that you don't survive the night." And so after a lot of running around and hiding in different places, because apparently this church had managed to get a lot of these what we call in India gundas, who are basically fists for hire, and they were pretty much everywhere. So he managed to sneak into the Finnish embassy, where I think there was a minister of foreign affairs. I'm forgetting his exact designation, but this gentleman said, "Come to the embassy now, and I will get you a tourist visa." And he took the tourist visa and went to Finland. And then he thought he'd just be there for a couple of weeks until this cooled down and he'd come back. But that never happened. He couldn't even come back for his mother's passing. She was on her deathbed. He called the bishop of in Mumbai, where this church was, and he requested that, can we just have a truce for just a few days? I just want to come. I want to see my mom. She's probably not going to last through the week. And then I will leave. He said, well, if you apologize, there will be no problem. And when the message reached,
Apologize for what? He
for-
wasn't the one that was giving people toilet water to drink.
exactly, apologize publicly to, he said that at first it was apologize publicly, but then later on it says, you would just have to apologize to me. You can apologize to me privately that you're sorry for insulting the church and therefore, and everything is going to be fine.
The church insulted itself, though.
Exactly. But they don't see it that way. They think that they had to put blame on him somehow. So when his mother got a drift of this, his mother, through his sister, his mother told her that if he apologizes and comes, don't let him in. So he stayed in Finland.
Because she didn't want him to basically sacrifice his integrity in order to see her.
Exactly. Now that is powerful stuff. Like when he told me that, I literally had no idea what to say. So so he actually made a film with Robert Eagle for the BBC called Guru Busters. Where he goes around, they exposed Satya Sai Baba in this one. They did a lot of the video coverage of these fake tricks, these obviously tricks of it. Anyway, and they went around the country, all from the southernmost point to the north, going from village to village, meeting people who were trying to do faith healing and black magic healing in villages.
This is in India?
Yeah, in India.
So he managed to come back. Now, granted, the whole thing with the statue was, what, 10 or 20 years ago?
Yeah, so the statue was in 2012. Actually, that was relatively recent.
So 11 years.
This was in the 90s. So this show.
Oh, okay.
And he went across the country, and he not only debunked them, he showed the people around these charlatans. He said, gather around, I will show you the same trick he's doing right in front of you, and I don't have any powers. And he would expose them one after another. It is absolutely amazing. There are a few clips of this on YouTube, which I'll link in the description, but
just an Indian version of James Randi in a way.
Exactly. And he was a great friend of James Randi, apparently.
That's cool.
Oh, James, as soon as he'd boarded the flight, he messaged Randy and said, of flight to Finland, he messaged Randy and said, I'm heading to Finland now. And so Randy immediately put out a post saying that Sanal is safe. He's headed to Finland. He's going to be fine. He's finally managed to get out of the country. And then they had him on at TAM after that, and he went and met everyone, and they had one of those talks that they have with, and he gave a talk himself actually at one of these things. So I've linked I'll send you the link to the interview, and it's quite a ride, man. They should turn that into a movie. It would pay to watch.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. Those news clips are still up there on YouTube where he's arguing with the church, with the people from the church. And he actually had to be moved to a private room during that conversation because one of them tried to attack him. So, yikes. It
really showing their love and compassion and the love of Jesus there.
Exactly. So, yeah, he's been fighting the good fight for a very long time. And from Finland, he hasn't missed a beat. He's still making a lot of videos and kind of exposing a bunch of people. So it's we're all in the same boat, but man, he's done a hell of a lot of work to fight against this sort of stuff. So yeah, and So anything else you wanted to add about your research in faith healing? Are you going to make a full video or a series of these, or are you already in there? I'm sorry.
So it's right now it already is a series, but it's partially done. So I have a number of videos that are exposing psychics. I did a really long video on Jack Coe, which was like one of the early, I talked about him a little bit earlier in this interview, that would set up these massive tent rallies and revivals. And his story is absolutely wild. And I feel like I was the first one to really cover it in its entirety accurately. There's a number of people in the history of faith healing that, like William Branham, that are just very well connected and tied to a lot of the modern faith healers that I want to expose and show like just how far back the fraud goes and just how widespread it was. This wasn't just one or two bad apples. This was like every single one of the big name faith healers. It
Oh,
was
cool.
it was like traveling snake oil salesman.
Yeah.
And so I want to go back and cover more of them. I have a video that I have an early access version of it for patrons, but it's basically just the script. It's like me reading the script. It's not, I don't have all the edits and all the B-roll and cutaway footage and stuff, but it's on a specific scam that's one of the faith healers' favorite go-to and like longest running scams in faith healing history. And I kind of talk about all the aspects of it that make that work, how it works. But I also have videos too that are up and coming on the psychology of belief and the tools and the tricks that they use and how we fall for it and how sometimes even faith healers themselves can fall for their own thing. Because I don't think that all of them, especially the smaller ones who are not these massive multimillionaires, I think that some of them have drank their own Kool-Aid and genuinely believe that sometimes they are healing people and sometimes it is a miracle, even if it's fully explained.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what's in the works. Eventually I would like to, if this gets enough momentum and I have the resources, I would love to turn this into a documentary and just do a really just full-fledged, like,
Yeah.
just flesh out the topic and explore all the things that I've been gathering for my channel, but just like in a really well-produced like format that I can put out on Netflix or Hulu or HBO or somewhere.
Netflix needs some clean, fact-based stuff, really. Such nonsense sometimes. But you know, that reminds me.
There are a few shows that kind of explore the more science side of things, but they're few and far between compared to, hey, here's Gwyneth Paltrow promoting her new vagina eggs that
That was so disgusting. But this actually reminded me that this is the British mentalist called Darren Brown. I think it's Darren Brown. I think he did an entire documentary or at least a full show about how he trained a couple of guys, or one guy,
Yeah.
to become a faith healer. And
Yeah.
he showed him all the tricks of the trade, showed him exactly how to do it, and let him loose in the Bible Belt. And
Yeah.
people believed it until he had to come out and say that I'm not the guy. I haven't genuinely done any of these miracles. I just know the tricks and I've been fooling you all along. And they didn't believe him.
Yeah.
There were a lot of people who just said, no, he's got God in him. That's the way it is.
Yeah. Or a common Christian response too is, okay, well, you were using tricks, but you were using trickery to try to replicate what God is doing authentically in actuality. And that's a very common cop-out answer. And that's something that whenever Randy would replicate the psychic acts or like the telekinesis and paranormal things and stuff, he would replicate it and show how, yeah, this can be done without magic. People would say, well, you don't use magic, but they are.
Yeah.
You know, and that's kind of the power of setting up tests where, you know, and the James Randi Educational Foundation is famous for its $1 million challenge, where they offered $1 million prize to anyone who could, under scientific controls, prove that they had any kind of supernatural or paranormal or otherworldly ability. And for 50 years, like, no one was able to ever claim the prize. But that's not the only such prize that's existed. There's numerous organizations around the world that have similar skeptics prizes for people who can prove the paranormal. And time again, challengers come forward trying to prove themselves and come up short. And I would be a little cautious when setting up a prize like that, a new one. Like, even if you're a scientist, you can be fooled. That you need to have very good measures in place to account for trickery.
Yeah.
Because if someone is like really good at sleight of hand and really good at magic, and you don't have a magician on staff who's really good at spotting that, and you just let them bring their own props and you let them handle and swap things in and out and have a ton of items on the table, and you're not filming the whole thing, and it's going on for hours, and you have multiple people that you're testing at a time. Like, there's a lot of options for the trickster to fool you, even if you think that they're trustworthy.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, that's a great point because I think only somebody of Randy's caliber who knows how to do tricks and magic through and through, who knows how sleight of hand is conducted. And of course, he was an extraordinary mind above and beyond that, would be able to see through every possible way that a trick could be done. And
you know who's phenomenal at that today, and who has had talks of potentially bringing back the $1 million challenge, or at least having certain settings where they can control and test for it, he's a mentalist named Banachek.
oh yeah,
That really-
Banachek. Yeah, I saw him in 2018. Yeah.
yeah, he has come up with tricks for Penn and Teller, like the famous bullet catch in the mouth trick. He came up with that. He has built tricks for Chris Angel, I believe David Blaine, but don't quote me on that. And he's got his own show. He headlines in Las Vegas, and it seems like he's reading people's minds, but it's all trickery.
Yeah.
And when he was basically fresh out of high school, him and this other guy, Steve Phillips, who was also a magician, actually went into a lab. And for years, this lab was testing for psychic abilities. And these two kids basically fooled the pants off of these scientists because they weren't actually putting these safeguards in place to make sure that there wasn't trickery. And when they did, the more safeguards that they put in place, the weaker the effects they were able to get from these boys. But they're having to think on the fly and come up with different ways to trick people. And I think for a while Check at least was managing the $1 million challenge for Randy, and testing and doing the tests for.
There was a story I heard recently. I think it was on the Skeptic's Guide about some sort of a project that James Randi had put together with Banachek and one more guy. Was that what you were referring to?
Probably Project Alpha.
Yeah, Project Alpha. So this guy, I keep forgetting his name, but I remember the name of his band, Ninja Sex Party. I think that's something, right? So I think he's the bassist. Do you know this guy?
Wait,
His name is.
I'm not familiar with the band.
I think I met him in 2018, but then I haven't been in touch. Ninja Sex Party. Hell of a name for him. Love
The question is, if it's a ninja sex party, would you even know that it's not? Do you even know that other people are in the room, or you think that it's just a solo experience?
Turn around. You hear a whisper. Suddenly you have a yes. Anyway.
You don't see anything. You just hear, "Oh God."
I think it was Brian Wecht. And I think he is making a podcast series on Project Alpha and he's gotten sources.
Wait, are you sure it's not? Are you sure it's not the World's Greatest Scam podcast?
Yes, that's the one.
It's basically, they did a whole series on, and it's a phenomenal series. Both of the hosts live here in Austin. It's Brian Brushwood. If you've been on YouTube much, you've probably seen Scam School, where he would go around and explore different scams and things. And then Justin Robert Young as well. Both have done politics podcasts and talked about other things and stuff. And they put together this podcast called World's Greatest Scam.
Yeah.
Or is it World's Greatest
Con? That's the
World's
one.
Greatest Con, where they'll explore various scams, and the production quality of it is just off the charts. It's phenomenal. And they even flew out to Las Vegas and did in-person interviews with both Beck and Phillips.
Yeah, so this is exactly what I heard about. So I can't wait to check this out. This sounds so exciting. Brian Brushwood, On a Quest to Find the World's Greatest Con, How to Fool Hitler, When is the Perfect Story Too Perfect? In the Flesh, etc., etc. So this is so there are a couple more episodes which are coming out, but it sounds very exciting. And I say this every time James Randi's name comes up, but in 2018, I managed to shake his hand and take a selfie, and it's one of the best moments of my life. Like, I look up to him so much. He's the guy who basically turned my brain around when I watched he and Richard Dawkins, like within a week of each other, showed me things about homeopathy and just these little YouTube clips, and made me question that if I was wrong about that, what else am I wrong about?
Yeah.
Because
Well, it's scary, even
kid. So
even if you know how homeopathy works and you are opposed to the quackery of alternative medicine. I don't know what it's like in India, but in the US, you can go to a pharmacy and you'll have two products that look almost identical, and one of them is half the price. And you're like, oh, wow, it says it cures headaches. And then you pick it up and you start reading the box, and it has like cures headaches. And then there might be like a tiny little asterisk, and it says this product hasn't been tested or approved by the FDA. And you look at the back and it's these complex sciencey sounding ingredients, and then like you look it up and it's all homeopathic nonsense, and it's
the thing
they're
is,
sneaky. They get you.
we don't need to fool people. People actively go towards the homeopathy because they believe in it. It's as simple as that. We don't have any disclaimers on any bottles. The government has promoted it to fight COVID. When the first lockdown started off, we had government issued posts which were basically saying you should take arsenicum album to boost your immunity and save you from getting COVID. So yeah, we've got an institutionalized pseudoscience department.
Yeah, we just have a bunch of people who stick their head in the sand and plug their ears and scream "nah, nah, nah," and, like claim that the vaccine has aborted fetal tissue in it, and so they won't touch it.
Fortunately, most of India didn't get to that part, but we still had a lot of Indians who believed in that nonsense, who were hesitant to take the vaccines. But fortunately, most of them did.
Vaccine hesitancy in India, though, is significantly less than the US, right? Because, like, you have had, I want to say that India specifically has had more recent cases of polio, significantly more recent than the US. And so people saw just how powerful firsthand vaccines were at eradicating and preventing such a horrible condition.
Exactly. That's why I still have it in my mind. My brother still has the scar of the inoculation on his leg. There's up till a certain year, 1975, 1976 is, I think, while the campaign was running, where it was government mandated that you have to get the polio vaccine, no matter what. I didn't get it, and by the next generation, people would have forgotten about it. It would have become just as alien because it works so well.
Yeah. And now it's completely eradicated from, I believe, every country but Afghanistan.
No, it's pretty much eradicated all the way through. Now what happens is, in some forms of the vaccine, it comes out in the poop and reinfects people, where the vaccine itself somehow manages to reinfect people. But this is only in countries where there's polluted water and where people are in contact with polluted water.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm seeing that the only two countries where it remains endemic is Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Oh, is that so?
But I don't know that it's like, if it's live cases, I don't know exactly what this means. But hang on. And part of the difficulty there is that, especially with the war in Afghanistan and the trickle over into parts of Pakistan, like a lot of these areas are so rural and so hard to reach and have levels of fundamentalism or terrorism that make it more difficult for humanitarian workers to access and to educate people on the vaccine and give them vaccine and stuff. And without that infrastructure, sure, it's really hard to actually vaccinate at scale.
Yeah.
Countries. Yeah.
And there are some who actually believe that it's having this sort of a vaccine is a sin.
Yeah.
So that kind of complicates things as well. Anyway, but thank you so much, man. I think we've done a lot of a download, but I can't wait. This was just the tip of the iceberg, right? Like this got the rest of your series too, which is going to come out. So send me the links. I will put them in the description and I'll send people over to that to check out your whole faith healing series.
Yeah, I have right now, it's all in a playlist, and no matter when people listen to this or watch this video, that playlist link will be active, but also as I make more videos, they will be added to the playlist so you can just see all of them up to date of what
Brilliant.
I've released.
Save the
Yeah.
planet, save the world. At least fight against faith healers.
Hey, at least we try. I think the notion that I think very early on, I had this, I don't know if it's misguided notion that I can save the planet, I can make a difference and stuff. And I think that on the one hand, it's so crazy that you could call it misguided. At the same time, I think that people who have the drive and the passion to really work to make a difference are the ones who actually do. And the you look at over the course of the last 7 years now since I really started doing my channel full time, it's reached over 30 million people or something, and that has a ripple effect where like my videos will influence other content creators, inspire other people to make channels. They make videos talking about similar topics and other topics that reach more people, and then these conversations ripple throughout society. So as someone who's seen one of your videos or one of my videos goes and has conversations, they bring up the points and the arguments that we make, and they direct people back to it, or they reference certain things or go to the original material. And society as a whole, I think, has had a shift where even just in the last decade, we've seen the kind of how common and acceptable it is to be an ex-evangelical, a former Christian, an atheist, deconverting, deconstructing. All of these things are becoming so much more common and less stigmatized, and people are having these conversations more openly and more publicly. And I think it's because of the work that both of us are doing, because it makes it okay to talk about. And
Exactly.
it gives people the ammunition. So even if we laugh about changing the world, and I think that some of that comes from a almost toxic missionary kid background of this idea of it's the Great Commission. You have to go into the whole world and save the world for Jesus. And it's this savior complex. I don't think that's healthy,
Yeah.
but I do think that we can stimulate a global conversation that equips people with the tools that they need to be able to combat misinformation and actually live better informed lives.
Absolutely. And speaking of which, one last thing. If there is someone watching whose family member or has been going to faith healing camps of some shape or form or some form, how can we convince this family member to either not go, or how can we make the best of that bad situation, do you think?
Yeah, there isn't a one size fits all answer to that, because for some people, I would say if they already have their heart set on going to this thing and you can't stop them from going, then at least try to convince them to don't throw out your medication. Like, still, it's okay to still see a doctor and to go. And if anything, you could argue within the realm of their faith, because, you're not going to change their mind on the Bible being true, at least not overnight. You're not going to change their mind on their faith or something. But you could use arguments that they would hold to about how God is not like truth is not afraid of evidence. And if God has healed you, then wouldn't it be a greater testimony to go and actually get tested and make sure that the cancer's gone? And now you've got a powerful testimony because you can go and be like, look, the test came back negative. But if the test come back positive, you can still believe in the things that you already believe, and you can still continue going to your faith healing rallies, and you can still pray and stuff. But we know that this medication helps, and please don't stop taking your medicine. A lot of times people will stop and then it's too late and there is a trail of bodies. And I personally, my aunt was a victim of faith healing ideology and lost her life because of it. And I haven't told that story on my channel yet, but I recently found out from my cousin, Elements, that had she not believed in faith healing, she could still be with us today. And these stories are so common. They're you go to my channel and you read the comment section, and it's just one testimony after another of people who have lost loved ones because of these sharks and these charlatans. And I would just say to a loved one, please, you have a family, you have people who love you, you have loved ones. This is not uncurable. This is not untreatable. At the very least, your best shot is going and getting medicine. I understand, empathize with them, get on their level, relate to them. Don't just preach at them, be like, you're wrong, and get argumentative. Like, compassion and empathy are so key, because if people know that you care and they know that you genuinely want and are seeking the best for them, and you're doing it from a place of love and not a place and position of superiority, they're going to be much more open to listening and taking the things that you have to heart. And so that would be my advice, is just empathize with the person. But even if you can't change their mind on something, see if you can still at least get them to continue seeing a doctor.
Absolutely.
And it might just save their life.
Absolutely. Man, thank you so much for coming on. That was incredibly enlightening. I can't wait to add that playlist and start on it. And I would advise everybody else to do exactly the same. His channel is Holy Kool-Aid with a K. And you have to check out his whole channel. It's incredibly enlightening, but especially about the faith healers. The playlist will be there, and I will put the link in the description. Thomas, thank you so much, man. It was great catching up with you again. Great to see you again. And
Yeah, we'll have to connect again next time that you're stateside.
yeah, hopefully October back at SciCon.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Get on, man. Take care. See you later. And everybody, thank you so much for watching. This has been Thomas Westbrook from Holy Kool-Aid, talking about faith healing and a whole bunch of other stuff that we managed to get into. If you really enjoyed this, which I hope you did, then please hit that like button, subscribe to this channel for a lot more interviews like this, and we will see you next week. Until then, be rational.